Isn't that a fine how do you do?
Yeah, isn't it? I don't know. Gears are something that you either play with or you don't, or if you do play with, I don't think many people play with them too much.
Yeah, so far it looks like the two of you and me.
I've changed gears quite a bit, but usually I just go taller by one, maybe two teeth, and that's about it. For me,
Yeah,
I find it's easier to change the main gear rather than the pinion gear because right now I don't have a puller.
that makes it awfully bloody difficult.
Yeah.
And there are inexpensive pullers, um, and while they're not you know the best that you can find, they certainly they do the job.
Yeah, I was gonna get one. I know John got the slotted one. I was looking at that, but there's also a scale auto that is very similar, made of metal instead of this sort of a fiber plastic thing.
Yeah, I still got one of the old
Metal slotters.
metal slotted ones. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that should be able to last for at least 4 generations.
Yeah, they've got this fiber thing now. I don't know much about it. Never seen one. But Scale Auto have one. It's a metal thing, very similar to the old slotted that it's just a couple of pounds more expensive.
Uh,
I was going to buy that because I do have some that I want to change. One in particular, and I'm having it's the pinion gear is right up close to the motor, and I'm having a tough time trying to separate the thing.
yeah, that's one of the advantages of the slotted is the fact that the collar that goes behind the gear is very thin. So you can, if you can't get that in there, then you've got a problem, because all the other, I have a Ninko puller, and I tried to thin that area down as well because it was way thick, and yeah, it's just, it makes it bloody difficult. You just
Yeah,
see if I can get it.
you don't want to ruin your motor just to get the damn pinion off. So anyway, oh, yeah, talking about gears. I've got a front engine fly little Ferrari, the 250 GTO, and it had a plastic pinion on it. So I took the plastic pinion off, and then I went to put a brass one on, and it was a little bit loose on the shaft. Have you ever had that problem, Melvin?
No, no, that's very strange. Was the slotted pinion, or what kind of pinion was it?
I was probably a slotted one because I think like I say, I changed the gearing on it. Anyway, it was so loose that I went to solder the thing on, and then it just turned into a horror show that I'm kind of stuck with this mess right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's no, I've changed a lot of pinions over the years, but never come across that.
No, this is the first time for me, so I'm just wondering, mind you, it's a fly, and mind you, again, it's the first time I've changed the pinion on a front engine car. It's not the motor shaft that it's stuck on, it's this little extra length of drive shaft, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the shaft drive. So
Yeah.
woof, I think I'm pretty damn sure I've replaced gears on shaft drives, on the, yeah. So
Anyway,
hi Larry, hi Blair.
Hello, how you doing?
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Good,
All
Blair.
good.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was just saying before, Larry, before you guys joined, I said Jamie was the one that asked about gears, and now he's not here.
It's funny how that goes. I apologize, I'm running a little bit late. It's been a bit of a firefight day. I'm actually going to mute and just listen in because I am actually still at my desk at work tying off the loose ends.
Oh, bloody hell.
You said it.
Oh, wow. It puts bread on the table.
That it does.
So what's with the 3 cars you got lined up there, Alvin? I'm sorry I missed it there at the start. By the way, I'm gonna have to slip off and have some dinner, and then I'll come back into it later. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
Are you recording this or not?
Yes, I am recording,
Okay.
and I will post it and send out the link again, Larry.
Okay. That's good because I found it interesting to go back and be able to see what I had missed.
That's probably not very much.
Not much, Larry.
All right. Wonder what's with Perry and Don and why they don't get in on these video chats.
They know everything already.
Or they think they do, eh?
Okay, but shall we start? Because I'd like to end up not much after 8 p.m. if at all possible.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So, if we'll all dive in. You guys can see my screen now?
Yep.
So yeah, first off, I just wanted to take a look at the different configurations. I mean, this is very basic, starting at the beginning. So if I go to, and on the right, behind door number 1, inline. And now I'll turn it bass backwards. Behind door number 2, Sidewinder, which got stuck. Oh, which I had neglected to undo the 5th screw. Terrible. Oh, and this motor pod is still loose on this fly.
Oh, is it ever?
And I am going to pin my own video so that I can see what you see. And behind door number 3, an angle winder. And I lied, it's not 3 flies, there's an Inco in amongst them. So in terms of the different types, so we're looking at inline, sidewinder, and angle winder. Yeah. Okay, some of the bigger characteristics. Just about all the cars that we run these days have the same approach. So you have the motor shaft running in a groove and keeping the mesh right. It also happens to, this little shaft happens to absorb all the cornering forces, because most cars, there's no, nothing else that supports the axle from moving sideways other than this. So the big thing with this is that it, there's a fair bit of force on that shaft. Now, a lot of people say that this is a bad thing because it's supposed to be, and just if I pull up something else, do you see the topics now, or do you still see the cars? Cars. Okay. There's some school of thought that says this is a very bad design because the motor shaft, when it turns, you'll see that the motor shaft on the side that rubs up against this side of the hub is moving down. The hub is moving down, the motor shaft is moving up. So you get a high speed. And it's a very small contact patch. They say that is very bad because it's high friction and you get high wear. Now I have to tell you, in all the time, if you have a little bit of grease on there, I've never had any issues with it. So it's one of those things that, yeah, it's in theory, it's perhaps not the best thing, but really, it's not that bad. The way to avoid that is to cut off the motor shaft as it comes out of the pinion, and then put bushings and stuff or a collar to locate the axle laterally. Do you understand that concept?
Yep.
So if you put spacers in here, then the wheels actually locate the axle and the gear. Then of course you have to set the mesh properly on the gear itself. In terms of, I'm just going to carry straight on inline, and I'll do the same stuff for the others as we get along. All of the inline stuff that we normally use, the flies and the slotted and the scale autos, etc., and the NSRs, they all have the same tooth pitch, not toothpick. I'm not cleaning my mouth. Tooth pitch. They're all supposed to be 48 teeth per inch. Because you have 48 teeth per inch, as you add teeth to the crown, it gets bigger. So I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that. As you know, a 24 tooth crown would be smaller than a 26, than a 28, than a 30. So it's just something to be aware of when you choose gears. If you're limited on space, and if you're getting, if you go from a small gear to a big gear or a big gear to a small gear, make sure that it still catches the pinion properly. Having said that, all inline pinions are the same size regardless of teeth. Now the engineer in you should immediately say, but that's BS. How is it possible that you can have the same gear pitch, teeth per inch, and you have more or less teeth on the same diameter of pinion? Now what they do is cunningly change the shape of the teeth so that the effect of the pitch circle diameter actually on more teeth is bigger than on fewer teeth. So the gear ratios actually still work, and the pitch is still relatively okay. But you would find that there's always a sweet spot. On 5.5 millimeter pinions, typically you get 5.5 millimeter pinions in 8 tooth, 9 tooth, 10 tooth, maybe 11. The sweet spot where the pitch naturally fits the size of the pinion is 9 teeth. So if you have any choice in the matter and you use a 5.5 millimeter pinion, try to stick with a 9 tooth. I mean, 8 and 10 are okay. Don't go for 11. That's just looking for trouble. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Sidewinder. Here we have a different situation where, well, a slightly different situation that both the pinion and the spur gear are constant diameter for different number of teeth. Now the first thing, typically with sidewinders, you get a number of different sizes of diameters of pinion. the standard slotted is 6.5 millimeters in diameter. They also make a 6.75 millimeter. So that's something to bear in mind if you have something that if you use a normal 6.5 millimeter, some of the scalies tend to end up with a lot of lash with a 6.5 millimeter pinion. In that case, you can use a 6.75. The spur gear is the same as the pinion. It stays at one dimension. But again, you have two, sorry, I wanted to add on pinions, NSR go up to 7.5 millimeters for what it's worth. So you've got some options there. The spur gears, you get in two sizes, 18 and 19 millimeters. Yeah, 18 and 19. Normal slotted is 18. Fly needs a 19, and what determines what you need there is the distance between the motor shaft and the axle, because you have to have gears that the half of the diameter of the spur gear plus half of the diameter of the pinion is the same as the distance from the motor shaft to the axle. Is that too much information?
No, but I'm under the impression that the reason for the different spur gears, like with slotted, is because of the different size wheel. You got the 15 and 17 diameter wheel.
Nope.
That you use like the 18 spur gear for the 15 diameter, the smaller wheel, and the 19 for the bigger wheel.
Nope. Nope. Slotted
Really?
only uses 18 millimeters.
But you can buy an 8, yeah, for slotted. But I mean, you can buy an 18 and a 19, and
Yes.
it's more the wheel size, because
Oh.
you have trouble with a 19 on a 15-inch wheel, 15 millimeter wheel.
The only way that you can get a 19 millimeter spur, you will not get a slotted car with a stock car with a 19 millimeter spur. All of the Sidewinder slotteds have 18 millimeter spurs. They
Okay,
make the 19 millimeters for the aftermarket, for the
yeah, true.
the
Like
skate and the flies, etc., or the flies and the Ninkos.
right. Right.
So if you want to use, well, I don't know why you would want to use a 19 millimeter on a slotted. The only way that you could possibly do it is to go for a 19 millimeter spur with an inline 5.5 millimeter pinion. But then you're going to struggle to get a decent ratio.
Don't they have two different sizes for the Sidewinder pinion?
A 6.5 and 6.75.
Yeah, and you use the 6.5 on the 19 spur.
No, you use the 6 on a slotted car. On all slotted cars, on a Sidewinder slotted car, you will always use a 6.5 millimeter pinion and an 18 millimeter spur. Don't change from that. Do not mess with that, because you're going to get all kinds of problems. Because if you're going to end up with a typical Sidewinder pinion would have 9, 10, 11, or 12 teeth. A typical inline would have 8, 9, or 10.
Yeah, they're different.
And the spurs, the inline crown gears would have like 24, 25, 26, 27 teeth. And the Sidewinder spurs would have like 28, 30, 32.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to go with a 5.5 millimeter pinion with a Sidewinder spur, you're going to end up with like a heavy a 4 point something to 1 ratio you'd struggle to get below that. And I dislike 4.1, 4-to-1 gear ratios.
Yeah.
If the starting point for me on gear ratios is like 3-to-1. So
I think that's the stock, and like you always get, it's always 27.9, isn't it?
Yep.
yeah, it's a good point to start. So it's if you get if you use a long can motor, and I'm jumping ahead now on some of the talk later, the torque. If I find that if I use a long can, I would that has a lot of torque, I would probably go for a 2.7-to-1 gear ratio.
Yeah.
So it's a, you know, otherwise you'll just be spinning your wheels and
Yeah.
you won't have much top speed. That's what long cans are meant for. They meant for they've got a ton of torque, so you gear them for you know, a low numeric ratio.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a high RPM motor, a short can with high RPMs and not very much torque, I could go up to a 3.5-to-1 or something like that, or heaven forbid, maybe even 4-to-1 on something like the FF, you know, the slim cans, because they typically have a lot of RPMs and very little torque. Does that make sense, guys? You're all very quiet.
Yeah. Just curious, Alwyn, the 5.5 pinions for the inline, you said they're all 5.5, right? For the inline?
Yes.
But they're still all 48 pitch.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I explained that.
Yeah, no,
How
but
they
I'm
do
just
it,
saying, what if you wanted to vary your ratios, or you just happen to have sidewinder pinions? I mean, you could still use the 6.5 or 6.75 to mesh with the inline gears. It's just that you're just going to change the ratios, right?
well, and then you can't use the motor shaft anymore to locate the gear.
Right. Okay, I understand that. In a lot of cases, I mean, back in the old days when you used to have the nuts or whatever that you turn around. Well, put it this way: if you don't use that and you haven't got much slop in your axle anyway, like you've got spaces on each side to cut down on the amount of slop there, you should be fine with that, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure
Again,
what he's
I'm
talking
struggling
about.
to think of why you would want to do that. You know, why would you want a 6.5 millimeter pinion on an inline? You're just causing trouble for yourself. You know, all the inline gears that are available are based on the 5.5 millimeter pinion and the tooth count on that. So you have, as I mentioned, for the 5.5 millimeter pinions, you typically work with inline crowns that have 24 to maybe 28 teeth. On the 6.5, you have more teeth, but it works with a bigger, with the sidewinder spur that
Right.
also has more teeth. That gives you more teeth together with more teeth. Fewer
Right.
teeth
Okay. Well,
together
I'm
with
just
fewer
saying
teeth.
that if you were trying to get a certain ratio, and you wanted to, like, if the inlines only go up to 11 tooth, whereas the sidewinders go up to 12 and a half
Larry,
more, don't they?
there is no situation that I can conceive of that
Okay.
we cannot with normal 5-teeth pinions, inline pinions, and normal inline crowns get a ratio that is suitable for any of the slot motors that we use.
Okay, good enough. Let's drop it.
Okay. So yeah, on the flies, then what you have here is a 6.5 millimeter pinion and a 19 millimeter spur, because the axle is quite a ways distant from the motor. On the slottets, you have a 6.5 millimeter and 18 millimeter, because the axle sits closer to the motor. And yeah, once again, I would not even think of deviating from those normal dimensions and ratios.
Okay. I guess with the monogram, you just have to play with it till you get a good mesh, right? Because I know that their sizes are totally, they seem to be proprietary almost.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They have the strangest, and yeah, they different rules apply for monogram. They went and threw the rule book out of the window.
Yep, that's for sure.
And I can't even remember what I did with. Let me take a quick look.
Hey, John.
Hey, boys.
John.
Hey, Jonathan.
I'm just curious, Nolan, do you on all your Excel sheets there, do you have the different ratios and that of the gears? Like, do you have the pinions 9 to 27 or whatever, so you can check and see, you know, if you make an adjustment, say on a long can, and drop it down to 2.5 or whatever, and then make another run, see what your difference is?
Larry, I typically, I'm an engineer and I'm mathematically inclined. I wouldn't bother with a table for something like that.
Okay.
Because I can immediately get, you know, if you divide it, I can mentally divide it to get the appropriate ratio.
No, I understand that. I just meant as far as say when you're tagging your performances and things like that, timing for your performance. Do you play that much around with the gear ratios, like on the long cans and that?
No, I typically on a long can, I would go, you know, a high torque long can, I would go for something like 2.7,
Yeah.
2.6 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And on a regular short can, I'd probably be around 3, depending on if it's a high revving motor, I may go a little bit higher. If it's a bit more torque, I may go a little bit lower.
Right.
But it's, I never deviate hugely from that, because I don't, if you stick within certain narrow bands, and what I can do, I can give some guidelines. I'll send out in an email afterwards. I'll send out some guidelines.
No.
Sorry, I won't send it out, Ross.
No
No,
problem.
talking to the dog.
I'm just curious, do you ever, when you go to Tanix or whatever, do you ever go there and take 2 or 3 sets of gears and try switching different ratios and then seeing how much of a difference or improvement or whatever you get on your lap times or not?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
No, I would typically put gears on a car that I think is appropriate.
Right.
And it would be most unusual for me to find that it's grossly incorrectly geared. That when I get home, that I make a note and say, okay, I've got to swap gears on this to lengthen or shorten the ratios. If you stay within the sort of normal numbers, I'm not a good enough driver to be influenced by small changes in gearing.
I was just kind of curious if when you were setting up the like the TT cars or something like that, whether you would play around with the gearing that much to get the last little bit out of it.
The problem, Larry, is that with proxy cars, you're going to find that the cars are going to race on long tracks and short tracks. They're going to race on tracks with running at 9.5 volts, and they're going to run on tracks that are at 12 volts.
Right.
So what you're trying to do is always come up with a good average.
Okay.
It just shouldn't, you shouldn't gear it so high that the thing wheel spins and bites you and it accelerates and it's unpleasant to drive and it has a low top speed, or the gearing is so long that it struggles to accelerate out of the corners. And if you stay within, as I said, if a motor has 300 gram centimeters of torque, I'll gear it like 2.6. If it has 160 gram centimeters of torque, I'll gear it at 3 point, just over 3.
Okay.
If it has 80 gram centimeters of torque, I'll probably gear it closer to 4.
Right.
But what we're talking about here is a range of torque from 85 gram centimeters to 350. And what I'm talking about is changing the gear ratio from, between 2.6 and 3.5.
Okay.
So, as long as you stay within those sort of bounds, it's unlikely that you would get any big difference. Now, if you have an NSR King long can motor that has 350 gram centimeters of torque, and you've geared it at 3.8 to 1, you're going to have a very unpleasant evening at the track.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And if you have a short can that has 85 gram centimeters or a slim can at 85 gram centimeters, and you're gearing it at 2.6, it's going to be bogging down all the time. You're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
Into its power band.
Yeah, it'll just be weak as hell.
Yep.
It'll
Okay.
be weak all 7 days long.
Alrighty.
For me, Larry, just to put my 2 bits in, my cars are all in the 3 range.
Yeah. Well,
It's a good all around for whatever.
yeah. Well, that's that's what the Scalextrics and everything they start at is 3.
Yeah, and I'm nowhere near good enough a driver to say, okay, I've absolutely maxed this car out, this car's gear ratio out. Let's make a change there. Not for me personally.
And
Yeah,
just
no, I was just wondering, with the 10X track there, it's got a nice long straight, and I'm just wondering if anybody's bothered playing with the changes on, say, maybe a slot it, dropping it down to 2.8 or something like that, and see if it got any better time ratio out of it.
At the 10X track, I would gear my cars the normal way.
Yep.
And if I want to go faster, I'd crank up the voltage.
Right. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Forgot about the voltage again.
Yeah. And remember, voltage makes a dramatic difference.
Yes. True enough.
If you remember, if the horsepower is proportional to the square of the voltage. So if you add 2 volts, if you go up from 10 volts to 12 volts, you end up with almost 1.5 times the horsepower. You're ending up with 1.44 times the horsepower. So,
Substantial.
yeah. The other thing to also consider, if you were to ask me if I were to err on one side or the other, I would rather gear a car too tall so that the acceleration is soft and the top speed is potentially higher, because it is easier to drive.
Right.
A car that has too much torque at the rear wheels is a bitch to drive. And if you're preparing a car for a proxy, I would far rather gear it soft. You know, it's like, here's my proxy car. You can, in one-to-one life, you can drive it in first gear or third gear. You know, drive it in third gear, please.
All my cars, if I got an NSR 25,000K motor, 25,000K motor, I always gear them higher, like around 2.8, because the drivability is so much better. You lose on the braking just a smidgen, but the drivability makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
That's all. Just, and even with the long can motors, like this, I got a couple of NSRs with the 350 gram motors, and I will gear them taller, just because if you gear them low, they launch right out of the track at start. They're a terrible thing to drive.
Yeah.
So it's just all about drivability. It seems like Larry might have been talking about speed, but to me, it's more about drivability, keeping the car in the slot.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, I've said this many times to all of you, I believe. I don't much care about how fast a car is in a straight line. That's not going to win you races. I care about how well a car handles, how predictable it is, how forgiving it is. And part of that is not having that vicious amount of acceleration of you know, a high numeric gear ratio. That just makes it an unpleasant thing to drive. And you will crash more regularly, and you will, it's just not worth it.
So go tall, by a little bit.
Yeah, so on a long can, 2.6.
Yes,
On the average short can, around 3.
just under.
On a slim can, 3.5, kind of thing. You know, maybe 4 if it's a heavy car. And of course, the weight of the car, etc., also plays a role.
Sounds good.
Back
Okay.
to the list.
Now this is an oddball, a Ninko angle winder. Ninko are the only people that use tapered pinions. Can you guys see on this image that the pinion is bigger diameter close to the motor,
Yep.
and it tapers down to a smaller diameter?
Yep.
Fortunately, they're the only people that do that. The reason why they did it is I don't know. There is one advantage of this configuration. All angle winder spur gears are tapered, and normally the face of the gear over here is parallel to the motor shaft, so that if you move the motor forwards and backwards, it will not affect the mesh. If you move the pinion on the shaft, it will not affect the mesh. With a Ninko motor, if I now push this pinion further away from the motor, the pinion would now engage with a spur gear at a piece that is larger diameter, so you would tighten the mesh. That is the only advantage that I can see of a tapered pinion. The question therefore arises if the spur gear, the face of the spur gear is parallel to the shaft, and you get no change in the mesh if you move the pinion, how do you change the mesh on an angle winder? Any takers? Okay.
Are we talking just about on a an Inco, or are we talking about an
No, I'm talking about not an Inco.
Okay, well, I would say that number one, you would, with not an Inco, you would change the angle with the motor sitting up.
No, that's too bloody hard. I mean, have you ever tried changing the angle of a motor on a plastic chassis slot car?
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not necessarily thinking plastic.
Okay,
Move the spur.
you move the spur.
Right,
To tighten the mesh, you move the spur outwards on a regular angle winder.
right,
Because you're then moving the face out this way. It moves, the face of the spur gear moves closer to the pinion. So if it's too loose, you add a spacer between the bushing and the gear. Now, Revo slots are great because you can move the motor. The motor you can move, you know, closer and further to the axle, so you can change the mesh that way. But otherwise, on slotted angle winders, for instance, you change the mesh by adding or removing spacers between the bushing and the gear. Does that sound logical?
Do you think that maybe the Ninco tried to, they figured that they would go with the angled pinion and spur more because of the old running the bevel gears in inline? There was less friction using bevel gears than straight cut gears.
I'm not convinced that there's less friction on a bevel gear. On a helical gear, I would buy it, that there's less friction. On a bevel gear, I don't necessarily think that there's less friction than on a straight cut gear. And I don't, short comment on friction. I think differences in friction like that on a slot car is irrelevant.
Right.
I think that the differences are so small that it's totally overwhelmed by other differences between cars. You know, that's one of those things that to me it's the same as the concept of locating the inline spur with the motor shaft, which is bad. Yeah, theoretically it's worse than locating it using the wheels or a collar. But the degree of badness is so small that nobody's going to notice it. So it's to eliminate that, to me, is getting to the point, you know, if you're really building an incredibly high-end proxy car or something like that, yes, it can do no harm. But for the likes of us, don't waste your time. There are much more important things to worry about than friction on gears. Okay, there are some differences in when it comes to friction. What is the best layout in terms of gears and friction?
Sidewinder.
Absolutely. Not even a question. Sidewinder is superior from a significant number of aspects. If you take a look over here, all the forces in the gearing is basically fore and aft. There's no lateral force in here. That is a good thing. So it is the most efficient I'm sorry, when I said friction doesn't matter, I'm talking about differences in friction with when you compare one angle winder to another, or one sidewinder to another, or one inline to another. There is a bit of a friction advantage on the sidewinders, but again, it's not a huge amount. When I say I prefer sidewinders, there are two main reasons for it. The one is the weight distribution. All the weight is at the back here, so you can balance the car more easily. And typically, you also use a short can. So I don't like long can motors. Let's be clear about that. I think they're generally way too vicious. They're way overpowered, and they're too heavy. So that's one of the reasons. And the other one is the mesh doesn't go out for whatever reason over time. You know, they're just simpler and cleaner and easier. Thoughts, comments?
I agree.
Yeah. So the big advantage to me is from a handling perspective. It just gives you a better balance and a better base to start tuning from. Okay, so we've spoken about a lot of things, cabbages and kings. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. What else did I want to bring up?
Back to the list.
How about the when you change the gears,
There we go.
how much braking that you lose as compared to running a different gear ratio?
Braking and acceleration.
Yep.
The gearing affects braking and acceleration in exactly the same way. So if you have a high numeric gear ratio, you'll have very punchy acceleration and you'll have good brakes. So on a 4-to-1 gear ratio, you would have very snappy acceleration and heavy brakes. On a 2.5-to-1, you'd have soft acceleration and less brakes. That, of course, ignores the effect of the motor. With a motor, you would find that the braking effect is normally, very often, closely aligned to torque. So a high torque long can motor would have strong brakes. A low torque short can or slim can would typically not have very good brakes. It depends on the motor design, of course. If it has strong neodymium, those good magnets, it'll have more brakes than a car with different magnets. So the motor design influences it as well. But as a rule of thumb, high numeric ratio is fast acceleration, good brakes. A low numeric ratio, slow acceleration, weak brakes.
And higher top speed.
Yes. And it also depends. You're not, if you have twice the RPM, or if you make the gearing 1.5 times lower, you're not going to end up 1.5 times the top speed, because now the torque of the motor is struggling. You're not going to get to the same RPM if you gear it at a low numeric ratio, because the car is going to struggle to accelerate. It'll struggle to overcome the friction. And when I talk about friction, I'm talking about all kinds of friction on the front axle, the braids, the rear axle, everything, and overcoming the weight. So say you have a 25,000 RPM motor and you're gearing it 4-to-1, maybe it'll rev up to 20,000 RPM before it, in a car, in a 1-to-1 car, it's the same thing. If you have an overdrive gear, the car's top speed is not, the car is not going to get to the red line with a heavy overdrive. So if you have it geared at 2.5, or say you're gearing it at 4-to-1, then your 25,000 RPM motor would top out at perhaps 20,000 RPM. But if you gear it at 2.5-to-1, it might only top out at 15,000 RPM before it runs out of torque. Remember, at 25,000 RPM motor is 25,000 RPM with zero load on it. And an electric motor at its maximum RPMs develops zero torque. The torque of an electric motor starts at maximum at 0 RPM, and it's a straight line down to the maximum RPMs. So if you gear it taller, you're not going to get an increase in top speed in the same proportion as what you're changing the gearing. So don't think if you change the gearing by 50%, you're going to have 50% higher top speed.
Massive change in gearing.
My wife has told me 1,000,000 times I shouldn't exaggerate so much, Ross.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've spoken about the gear types. We've spoken about diameters. Oh, the one thing we haven't spoken about is angle winder. I don't know if anybody has noticed, but you get two configurations of slotted angle winder gears. The one is that the gear is on the chassis side of the hub if you have a high tooth count, and on a low tooth count they put the gear on the outside of the hub so the gear can be closer to the perfect 48 teeth per inch pitch. I don't know if I have some examples. I should have thought of that. Good grief. Let's see. Now it's going to be difficult to show you as well, I think. This is a problem. If you take a look at this gear is meant to sit like this over. Can you see how it's supposed to sit? Yep. So that it tapers to the outside. This is a big gear with a high tooth count. So the gear is closer to the, is a big diameter, so it's closer to the chassis. I suppose I should hold it next to an angle winder. Because if it were on the other side, now let's see if I have a low tooth count angle winder gear. Murphy's Law says I won't have one. Because I really don't have many angle winder gears at all.
Isn't part of the advantage of the angle winder also is because number one, you can run a smaller circumference gear. So that number one, you don't have to run as big of tires and then don't have to have as much ground clearance.
Larry, I suppose so.
I mean, back in the old days when you were running, when we had the, I'm trying to remember can't remember, it was the different gears that used to thread on the axle, but you always had to worry about how big the gear was in relation to how fast, and likewise you ended up having to change your tires faster because you would wear down the the tires before you before you hit the teeth
Spur gear.
almost hitting the ground
Um,
or the bottom of the track.
it is possibly an issue for 19 millimeter Sidewinder gears, but with 18 millimeters, I've never had a concern. With an offset pod or something like that, not an issue. Now here we have the two, if you take a look at these two gears, oops, if I don't drop them, you can see this lighter colored one is smaller than the golden colored one because it has fewer teeth. And if you take a look, this one has the hub on the small diameter side, you know, of the teeth. Can you all see that?
Mhm.
Whereas this one is the opposite. It has the small diameter outside. So it is meant to sit with a hub between the gear and the chassis. So now it is a smaller, that's the smaller diameter you were talking about, Larry.
Right.
So is that an advantage from tire size and tire wear? I'm not too concerned about that. What it does give you an advantage is that you can have a much wider range of teeth, of tooth count. Because on the high tooth count, you go for the large diameter with a hub on the outside. And on the small number of teeth, you go for the small diameter with a hub on the inside. Make sense?
Yep.
So it is just something that you need to be aware of when you're changing gears on an angle winder. The hubs, depending on the tooth count, the hub is on a different side of the gear. And I do believe I've just lost another grub screw, but I think I'll survive.
What Larry was talking about just before is what I'm having with my sine winders on my flies and scalies, because my tires are wearing down and they've got the 19 millimeter spur gear, and now I am gear driven. My tires don't touch the track. My spur gears are what's driving me along.
But that gives you positive traction.
Yeah, but this is where I was talking early on with the 18 and 19 millimeter spur gears and the wheel size. I'm going to go back and look at that one a little bit more, Alwyn.
Yeah, but as I commented, slotteds, all stock Sidewinder slotteds come with 18 millimeter spurs.
Yeah.
So the only change you can make is in the direction you don't want to go. The only option that you have on flies and scalies is to try an 18 millimeter, you know, the smaller spur, and then go with a 7.5 millimeter NSR pinion.
Yeah, and see, that's what I'm playing with right now, or I was. I kind of gave up. I've got a monogram Lola, and I think that is not an angle winder, but it is. I think the motor is just cocked over a couple of degrees. And I tried to put in a, is that one right there?
Yeah, this is a monogram Lola T70.
Yeah, that's the one.
So the motor is a regular sidewinder.
Okay, because I've got one there where the motor is just tilted a small amount, just a couple of degrees off being parallel with the axle. And I'm having a hell of a job. I'm trying to mix up all the slotted spur gears and things with the NSR pinion gears, and it's a horror show, but I'll have to go back. And it's been about 2 years since I played with that one. I'll play again.
Yeah, the one thing that you would notice, I changed the,
So you got the plastic pinion on that.
I left the plastic pinion on there because it is probably about 8 millimeters in diameter.
That's the problem. That's the one I'm having trouble with then,
Yeah.
because it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, so what I've got is the 19 millimeter. If you take a look at the gap between the motor and the axle here, it is huge. So
Okay.
the distance between the axle and the motor shaft is much bigger than anything else. You know, slotted and NSR have a small distance. Fly and Scaly have a bigger distance. Monogram is in a different universe. They're way bigger.
Mm.
And part of how they get away with it is the big pinion. So
Yeah.
that's the reason why I didn't change the pinion on this one. I believe this is going back several years.
Yeah,
It's probably the only way that I could get the slotted spur gear to mesh properly. What one could consider here is take a look at the NSR 7.5 millimeter pinions, Ross.
I think I've got them, Alwyn. I went and bought them, and it fits, but it's not a decent mesh. So I don't know whether it's noisy or not. I never got round to running the car. I'm just trying to get the gears to fit. Maybe I'll stick the plastic one back on.
That's what I ended up doing. I changed the motor out because the braking on the monograms is so poor. I don't know, for some reason, I think they have weaker magnets in them.
Okay.
And I put I think either a fly or a slotted motor in it, and totally different car. But I used the same gearing because it's the only gearing that would fit.
Yeah.
Okay, Larry.
The only alternative that you have to that, Ross, is you have to grind out the motor holder
Yeah, okay.
to move the motor closer to the shaft, sort of in that small angle like an NSR motor. You know, the NSR sidewinders are at that slight angle because the motor is so close to the rear axle. So if you grind out the motor holder over here towards the back, you can move the motor, you know, sort of twist it closer to the axle and then glue it in place.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it as it is because I kind of prefer to have the motor anchored
Yeah.
just solid, and I'll just shove the plastic gear back on. I like the car, but okay.
I say, Ross, it all sounds well and good until you fuck it up.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
put a slotted chassis under it.
Yeah.
Hey, Alan, check your Ninko motor for that grub screw.
You can see something that we can't.
No.
Stuck in there, maybe magnetic. There's a gear fell in there.
No, it didn't fall off, I don't think, but it'll surface at some stage.
You'll pick it up with a vacuum cleaner.
Never to be seen again.
That's right. That's right. But it won't be there. It won't be in the way.
No, and it won't kill the vacuum cleaner either. It's not as if it's a 5 kilogram chunk of steel that's going to go through the side.
Yeah.
Whatever. It will come out, and if it don't, I've got hundreds of spares. Okay, so let's see what have we spoken about and what haven't we spoken about. We've spoken about the gear types for the different configurations. We spoke about the diameters. We spoke about the ratios and the effective performance. We spoke about the motor characteristics. We've spoken about the tooth pitch and how they fudge it on the constant diameter pinions. We've spoken about preferred ratios. Mesh settings. Yeah, it's just to reiterate on inline. If you use the 5.5 millimeter pinion and you locate it with a motor shaft, life is beautiful. If you want to do anything else, cut off the motor shaft and locate the axle with spacers on the bushings and the wheels, or the or collars, you know, the axle stoppers. Are you guys familiar with the axle stoppers that you can buy?
Yep.
It's just a little aluminum collar with a grub screw, so you can set it anywhere on the axle and against the bushing. It's sort of
I
like
just
yeah.
I just shim the wheels,
Yeah, that's
and then
normally,
when I've got the wheels where I want them and they're reasonably firm, very little float, then I just adjust the inline crown
Yep.
until there's no load on that
yeah,
on the drive shaft. So
that's
there you go.
Ninko cheaped out, of course. They have an axle stopper, but all that it is, it's a piece of plastic on the inside. So this axle is located by the spur gear on the outside of this bushing and this axle stopper on the inside. So
Is that a press-on thing, Alan?
yes, it is. It is a typical Ninko kludge. It's I don't like it at all, but hey, whatever.
Yeah.
What else? Oh yeah. So the axle stopper, as I say, is just a piece of aluminium with a grub screw. Much better. But yes, I also prefer to use the wheels and shims. It's much simpler.
Yes.
Huh.
Without a doubt.
Bedding in the gears. Now I've heard all kinds of horror stories about this. The big one that's out there is if you have a gear that is this is more on angle winders and definitely on inlines that are out of true. People run the axle in the car and they hold a cigarette lighter under it and they warm the plastic so that it softens and it mates better to the pinion. I've never done it, and I'm telling you categorically, I will never do it. To me, that is just too bloody Heath Robinson. The other one is toothpaste. Anybody heard that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
So they say they stick toothpaste on it to polish the gears. Has anybody done it?
Yep, I have. Many
Oh.
times.
And have you gotten any cavities on the gears?
No cavities, but definitely got a lot better mesh.
I've never done it. Typically what I do, guys, when I get a new car, and any car of the any gear configuration, the first time I run it, I don't put any grease on the teeth on the two gears. I will put oil in the bushings, etc., etc. But the first time I run it is I just run it without oil for a little bit, and then when I come home, I I use super dupe grease on the gears. So if they want to rub each other up the wrong way or the right way, then that's it. Does that make sense? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah,
any
no,
better? I don't know.
Well, I still do run toothpaste quite often, and just to get a better mesh. We used to use sometimes valve lapping compound too, back in the old days.
Yeah, the last time I had valve grinding paste was in South Africa, so I haven't used any valve grinding paste over here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we've got it over here.
I haven't lapped valves since.
I don't bother using any of that stuff because I think it would make too much of a mesh.
Yes.
And I just like keeping it clean and just let the thing naturally wear in.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's as I say, I'll just run it for a short
Leave
while
it.
without any lubrication on the teeth, and after that, I keep it lubricated properly.
They come with a little bit of grease on them, so I just let it go.
Those are for RTR, for ready-to-run cars. I'm talking more about when I build
Okay,
a
when you
car from
change
scratch with scratch parts.
scratch parts. Well, you got to use something like that to get rid of the scratches, Alvin.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a
Polish it off.
finely honed sense of polishing them.
Fine, honed sense of humor.
Hey, Alwyn, I'm just curious. So I know that I'm just looking at my Mr. Slot car, and I mean, I know the gears in that thing are so thin that just wondering, are they actually smaller or a different size than the Slottits, or are they?
MR slot car uses 2mm axles, if I remember correctly.
2mm.
Don't they have the very thin axles?
Um,
I'm pretty sure.
could be.
Wow.
I'd have to take another car apart, but the stock, I'm
Oh,
pretty
hang on,
sure.
I've got one here. I'll just get my caliper out.
If it's 2mm, is that not the size of the shaft for an inline fly?
Yes.
Yes, for the motor shaft is 2mm.
Where do you get those X?
MR slot cars are 2.3 millimeter,
Okay, they're
2.3.
or 2.3, 2.4.
No
So
good.
that's similar to slot.
What is that?
Yeah, 2.3.
Okay, so I was talking through my hat. NSR sells 2mm axles.
Do they?
Yep.
I've never, God damn, I've looked and looked, mind you, a couple of years ago. All right then.
But I don't know if many people carry them, Ross. I think if I've, you know, it's like Santa Claus. Everybody's heard of it, but nobody's seen them.
Yeah, because like with that little Ferrari, the Fly Ferrari I was talking about earlier, I want another shaft because I soldered that pinion on.
Yeah.
Other than dismantling another inline, I'd rather just buy a new shaft. I'll have a look.
I have some drive shafts. If you need one, give me a shout. I bought some. I can't remember what brand it was. Oh look. And it is Auto Art.
Auto Art. Oh.
So it comes with a bronze bushing,
Oh, nice.
which is cool.
Nice. Yeah. The spring and the pinion.
Yes, both of which I pull off and throw away.
Yeah.
Because I use polythene tubing for the
I use a ballpoint pen.
Yes, that's
plastic.
the right thing.
Auto Art.
WRITE.
Can you still buy Auto Art stuff?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Cool.
No,
I think
I bought those parts. I bought years ago. Now I bought a number of different motor shafts, shaft extensions for front engine cars, and I know the one. I can't remember if it's the Auto Art that is slightly under 2mm. A slotted pinion doesn't fit on it properly, so that wouldn't solve your problem.
Oh,
But
okay.
I have two different brands. I'd have to take a look again, Ross, and see what which one is right and which one is wrong.
Okay. Okay.
And
I'm not excited.
the last item on the list, we spoke about the motor shaft versus the spacers. The last thing is the ubiquitous anything else.
Anything else? Anything else? Come on, Larry. You're good at anything else.
Hey, Blair, are you still there?
Yeah, but he's a mutant.
Okay, I was going to tell him that I know he sent out part of it. One of his requests was how to repair the fly slot wheels after they break and things like that. And if he goes on to the home racing world, the slot car, the garage, or there's another one there. If you put in slot racing tips and setup, there's one fellow that comes up on his, and he's got about 20 pages of stuff there that is really quite interesting. And he talks a lot about weight and distribution and how the car comes out of the slot and this and that, and how you determine where you should be putting the weight or what might be causing it to come out for that reasons, and just some awesome information. I think it's Arnold and some other guy and on the Slot Car Garage. You got to look
Thanks, Larry.
for it. You're welcome. I tried to send you a link on it, but for some reason, hey, when